In a luxurious building, a 9-inch secret changes the lives of everyone who touches it. A humble housekeeper and a reclusive millionaire find themselves bound to one another. Fate unites them in an unexpected way, challenging everything they know about desire and sacrifice. If you love romance stories, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. Gideon Sinclair was the kind of man who commanded respect without having to ask for it. At 35, the heir to the largest real estate empire in New York City, he carried on his shoulders not only a fortune that stretched across skyscrapers and luxury condominiums scattered throughout the metropolis, but also a weight that few knew about. His loneliness was visceral, as sharp as the cold wind that swept across the top floor of the tallest commercial building in Midtown Manhattan, where he lived isolated in an apartment that felt more like a bunker of glass and concrete. The walls of his penthouse were lined with American art worth fortunes, but Gideon rarely looked at it. His gaze always drifted to the immensity of the city below, watching the lights that twinkled like terrestrial stars, each one representing lives he could never truly touch. Because Gideon Sinclair carried a curse, not in the mystical sense of the word, but something far more real and terrifying. Every woman who got too close to him, every woman who dared to love him, ended up destroyed. It wasn't paranoia. It was history. Marianne, his first serious girlfriend at 22, had drowned at Lake Placid during a romantic weekend he had planned. An accident, the newspapers said. A tragedy. Gideon knew it wasn't. He knew that something in him, some dark energy he had carried since childhood, had contributed to that tragedy. Then came Camilla, the socialite he met at a charity gala in Miami Beach. She was beautiful, intelligent, ambitious. They dated for 2 years, and Gideon even began to think that maybe, this time, it could be different. But Camilla developed a deep depression shortly after they moved in together. She started having terrible nightmares, talking to herself, seeing things that weren't there. She ended up committed to a psychiatric clinic in the Berkshires, where she remained to this day, 5 years later, in a vegetative state. And finally, Lucia. Lucia had been the cruelest lesson of all. A brilliant lawyer, a partner at one of the most prestigious firms on Wall Street. They fell madly in love, and for the first time, Gideon believed he could break the destructive pattern that followed his love life. He proposed to her on a trip to Maui. She said yes, radiant, her eyes shining with tears of happiness as the sun set. Over the sea. 3 weeks later, Lucia was dead, an aggressive cancer that appeared out of nowhere and consumed her in a matter of days. The doctors couldn't explain it. Gideon knew they didn't have to. Since then, for 4 years, he had lived like a gilded hermit. He commanded his business empire through video conferences and formal meetings. He avoided intimate contact with any woman. He had even fired all the female employees in his company, replacing them with men, in a desperate attempt to protect any female soul from his toxic presence. But there was something Gideon kept, hidden, something only his late grandfather had known. In the reinforced safe in his private office, protected by passwords and codes he changed monthly, was an object that had belonged to the Sinclair family for generations. A small rosewood prayer box with inlays of gold and precious stones, measuring exactly 9 inches in height. It was a colonial-era piece, brought by the first Sinclairs, who arrived in America in the 18th century. According to the family legend, his grandfather had told him in whispers when he was a child. The prayer box had been cursed by an enslaved woman who was brutally murdered by the first Gideon Sinclair, his great-great-grandfather, after he discovered she was practicing African rituals hidden in the slave quarters. Before she died, she had cast a curse. All men of the Sinclair lineage who bore the name Gideon would be condemned to destroy every woman they loved, until one day a woman pure of heart would be able to break the curse with true love. Gideon had never taken the story seriously, until he began to live exactly what the legend foretold. Now, in the solitude of his penthouse, he watched the city through the armored windows while drinking a glass of 20-year-old Scotch whiskey. It was an ordinary Thursday in March, the New York autumn beginning to show signs with a slight drop in temperature. Gideon wore an impeccable Armani suit, even though he was at home, as he never knew when he might need to appear in an urgent video conference. That's when he heard the sound of the door opening on the floor below. Gideon frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. The cleaning crew only came on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, always from 9 in the morning until noon when he wasn't there. It was a strict protocol established by him. No female employee was to be in the building when he was present. He left the glass on the marble table and walked silently to the private elevator that connected his penthouse to the office on the floor below. He descended in silence and peeked through the corridors. The light was on in the main office, and he could hear the soft sound of someone shuffling papers. Gideon felt his heart race. In 4 years of self-imposed isolation, this was the first time someone had invaded his space while he was present. He walked cautiously down the polished hardwood hallway, his steps muffled by the Persian rugs that decorated the space. When he reached the office door, he saw a woman with her back to him, organizing documents on his desk. She was small, delicate, wearing the simple uniform of the cleaning company. Dark jeans and a white polo shirt with the Citywide Cleaning Services logo. Her brown hair was tied up in a high bun, revealing a slender nape and a few rebellious strands that had escaped. Gideon stood paralyzed, not by the intrusion but by the strange sensation that washed over him as he observed this unknown woman. It was as if an electric current was running through his body, an energy he hadn't felt in years. Something about her was different. That's when she turned around. Lena Collins was 28 and had the purest face Gideon had ever seen. Fair skin, large and expressive brown eyes, naturally pink lips that parted in surprise upon seeing him. She clutched a folder of documents to her chest like a protective shield. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sinclair," she said in a soft but firm voice. "I didn't know you were here. Normally you're not." "Who are you?" Gideon interrupted, his voice coming out harsher than he intended, not out of irritation but pure nervousness. This woman's presence was stirring something deep inside him, something he had buried long ago. "Lena Collins, sir, from the cleaning company. I'm filling in for Mary Jo, who's sick. She gave me the instructions but forgot to mention you'd be here today." Gideon studied her face. There was something genuine in her expression, a crystal-clear honesty that disarmed him. Lena didn't show the servile nervousness that most people displayed in his presence, nor the false confidence of someone trying to impress him. She was natural. "The instructions are clear," Gideon said, forcing coldness into his voice. "Cleaning only when I'm not present. Never during my stay in the building." "I know, sir, and I apologize. I thought I could finish quickly before you arrived. I was almost done." Gideon noticed she didn't avert her gaze. Most people avoided direct eye contact with him, intimidated by his presence or position. But Lena looked at him with a serenity that both bothered and attracted him. "Where are you from?" he asked, not knowing why the question had come out. "Rural Louisiana. Sir, I came to New York 10 years ago. Family? Just me now. My parents passed away when I was a teenager." Gideon felt something stir in his chest, a pang of empathy he hadn't felt in years. There was a familiar loneliness in Lena's eyes, a quiet strength he recognized. She had survived just like him, but where he had become bitter and closed off, she seemed to have kept an inner light burning. "Finish what you're doing and leave," he said, turning his back on her. He needed to get out of there before that strange feeling took him over completely. But as he was about to leave the office, Lena spoke. "Mr. Sinclair." He stopped without turning around. "Thank you for not firing me. I know I broke protocol. I need this job." The simplicity and honesty of her words hit Gideon like a punch to the gut. When he finally turned to look at her again, Lena was bent over, organizing the papers she had dropped in her nervousness. The lamplight fell on her hair, creating golden highlights that mesmerized him. Gideon felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Desire, not just physical, but a deep longing to know this woman, to discover what lay behind those serene eyes. And that terrified him. "Which cleaning company did you say you work for?" he asked, trying to sound professional. "Citywide Cleaning Services, sir." Gideon made a mental note. He would call them the next morning and ask for Lena to be transferred to another client. It was the right thing to do. The safe thing. "Finish up and leave," he repeated, softer this time. When Gideon got back to his penthouse, he poured himself another scotch and stood watching the city, but his mind couldn't stray from the image of Lena Collins. There was something about her that deeply disturbed him, an innocence he hadn't seen in a long time, a quiet strength that drew him in like a magnet. It was almost 11 at night when he heard the service elevator come up to his floor. Frowning, Gideon walked to the door and saw Lena getting out of the elevator, carrying a plastic bag. "What are you doing here?" he asked, genuinely confused. Lena seemed surprised to see him. "I'm sorry, sir. I forgot to clean your penthouse. Mary Jo said to always do it, even when you're not here. I thought you had already left." Gideon watched her. There was something strange about the situation. Lena seemed genuinely confused, as if she hadn't expected to find him there, but there was also a determination in her eyes that hadn't been there earlier. "It's too late for cleaning," Gideon said. "Come back another day." "I can't, sir. I have other clients tomorrow. If I don't do it today, Mary Jo could lose the contract, and she has children to support." Her genuine concern for her co-worker touched Gideon more than he wanted to admit. He watched her in silence for a moment, noticing details he had missed earlier. Her hands calloused from hard work but well kept, her straight posture despite a difficult life, the way she looked at him without submission, but with respect. "All right," he said finally, "but be quick." Gideon moved away to the living room, trying to focus on the documents he had brought from the office. But his eyes kept straying to Lena, who worked with a silent efficiency that impressed him. She made no unnecessary noise, didn't touch his personal things, just cleaned with an almost artistic precision. It was when she reached the hallway leading to his bedroom that Gideon felt something change in the air, an electric tension that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Lena had stopped in front of the closet door where the safe with the prayer box was located. "Don't go in there," Gideon said quickly, getting up from his armchair. Lena turned to him, and for the first time that night, her eyes showed a different emotion. It wasn't fear or curiosity. It was as if she was being called, drawn to something she couldn't explain. "I'm sorry, sir, it's just... I felt something strange here, as if..." "As if what?" Lena hesitated, running a hand through her hair, which had partially come loose from the bun. "As if something was calling me. It's hard to explain." Gideon felt his heart pound. Those were the exact same words Lucia had said the first time she was in his penthouse, and Camilla too. They had all felt the call of the prayer box. But there was a difference. Neither Lucia nor Camilla were pure. Both had had previous relationships, complex life stories. Lena emanated something different. A clean, whole energy. "Finish the cleaning and leave," Gideon said, his voice sounding harsher than he intended. "And don't go into that closet. Ever." Lena studied him for a moment, and Gideon had the strange feeling that she could see right through him, see things he kept hidden. "Yes, sir," she said simply, and went back to work. When Lena finally finished and prepared to leave, Gideon walked her to the elevator. There was something he needed to know. "Lena," he said as the doors were about to close. "Are you—" He stopped, realizing how invasive and inappropriate the question would sound. "Am I—" "What, sir?" Gideon looked into her eyes and saw a purity there that haunted him, not just physical but spiritual, as if she were untouched by the corruption of the world. "Nothing," he said finally. "Good night." The elevator doors closed, and Gideon was left alone in the hallway, feeling as if a part of him had left with Lena. For the first time in 4 years, the loneliness of his penthouse weighed like a tombstone on his chest. That night, Gideon had his first dream of a woman since Lucia's death. He dreamed of Lena dancing barefoot in a field of wildflowers, laughing with a joy he had never known. In the dream, he ran after her, trying to reach her, but whenever he was about to touch her, she disappeared like smoke. Gideon woke up with a racing heart and a terrible certainty. Lena Collins would be his ruin, or his salvation. but there was no way of knowing which until it was too late. The next morning, Gideon called citywide cleaning services. He had every intention of asking for Lena to be transferred to another client far away from him, safe. But when the receptionist informed him that Lena Collins had specifically requested to remain responsible for cleaning his building, something inside him surrendered. "All right," he said, hanging up the phone. "So be it." Gideon Sinclair didn't know that, at that very moment, hundreds of miles away, in a small church in rural Louisiana where Lena had grown up, the old statue of Our Lady of Sorrows had shed a single tear. And that tear, according to local legends, was an omen that a great trial was about to begin. A trial that would test the strength of true love against the darkness of the past. The Sinclair family curse was about to meet its greatest adversary. And Lena Collins had no idea of the destiny that awaited her. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Gideon Sinclair's life. He found himself waiting for Tuesdays and Thursdays, the days Lena came to clean his penthouse. He began to adjust his schedule to be present during these visits, something that went against all the self-preservation instincts he had developed over the last 4 years. Lena, for her part, seemed equally affected by his presence. Gideon noticed that she started taking longer to finish her work, finding extra tasks that didn't exist before. She would reorganize the books in his private library, polish furniture that was already impeccable, water plants that didn't even need water. Not that Gideon minded. On the contrary. On a Tuesday in April, as a New York drizzle created a grey veil over the city, Gideon decided to break the awkward silence that always hung between them. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked as Lena was finishing cleaning the living room. She turned, surprised by the offer. It was the first time in 3 weeks he had spoken a personal word to her. "I don't want to be a bother, sir." "It's no bother. I was about to make some for myself." Gideon walked to the gourmet kitchen of his penthouse and prepared the coffee in the state-of-the-art Italian machine. But when it came to serving it, he chose to do it the simplest way possible, with a paper filter as his grandmother had taught him in his childhood. He didn't know why, but he sensed that Lena would appreciate something made by hand more than with sophisticated technology. They sat at the table on the balcony, protected from the drizzle by the armored glass that surrounded the entire perimeter of the penthouse. Gideon watched Lena taste the coffee and smiled discreetly. "Is it good?" he asked. "It's great. It's been a long time since I had coffee made this way with a filter. It reminds me of my grandma." "Were you raised by your grandmother?" Lena hesitated for a moment, as if she wasn't used to talking about her personal life. "For a while, yes. After my parents died, I went to live with her in a little town in Louisiana. Grandma Benedicta was a folk healer, known throughout the region, people. I came from far and wide to see her." Gideon felt an involuntary shiver. Folk healers dealt with energies he preferred not to consider, especially given his family history. "And what did she do, exactly?" "She'd cure the evil eye, bad luck, heartbreak." Lena smiled with nostalgia. "Grandma always said I had a special gift, that I could feel things other people couldn't. But I never took it very seriously." "What kind of things?" Lena looked out the window, watching the grey city below. Bad energies in places, people who carried deep sadness. Sometimes I would dream of things that were yet to happen. She turned to him. "You must think it's foolish." Gideon didn't think it was foolish. In fact, it explained a lot. The way she had been drawn to the closet where he kept the prayer box, the strange feeling he felt in her presence. "And do you still have these gifts?" "I don't know. It's been a long time since I've paid attention. Life in the big city doesn't leave room for those things. Everything here is so fast, so rational." Gideon drank his coffee in silence, processing the information. If Lena really had some kind of half-spiritual sensitivity, it could explain why she was different from the other women, and also why he felt something different in her. "Why did you come to New York?" he asked. "After Grandma died, I had nothing holding me there anymore, and I always dreamed of studying, going to college. I thought I'd have more opportunities in the city." "Did you manage to study?" Lena laughed, but there was no bitterness in the sound. "I'm in my 4th semester of education at a public university. I study at night, work during the day. One day I'll teach children, Gideon was impressed by her quiet determination. Working cleaning offices during the day and studying at night required a willpower he admired. It must be very tiring, he commented. It's worth it. Every sacrifice is worth it when you have a dream. The simplicity and honesty of her answer touched Gideon deeply. How long had it been since he had heard someone speak of dreams with such conviction? How long had it been since he himself had a dream that didn't just involve keeping himself isolated and safe? It was at that moment that Lena frowned and looked towards the hallway. That led to the bedrooms. "Mr. Sinclair, may I ask a question that might be indiscreet?" Gideon tensed. "You can try. There's something in that closet you don't want me to get near, and every time I get close to it, I feel a very strange energy. Very heavy." Gideon felt his heart race. "It's just a closet with personal things." "It's not just that." Lena looked at him with those deep eyes. "There's something in there that hurts, sir, that has been suffering for a long time, and that is waiting." "Waiting for what?" "I don't know. But I can feel it." Gideon stood up abruptly from the table. This conversation was going too far, entering dangerous territory. "I think you should finish your work and leave for today." Lena remained seated, studying his face. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, it's complicated. I know you don't know me well, and I know I'm just the cleaning lady, but if there's something troubling you, something related to that place, maybe I can help. Grandma taught me many things." Gideon looked at her for a long moment. There was something in Lena that both soothed and haunted him. Her serene strength that made him want to trust her, to open up completely. But he couldn't. He couldn't risk destroying another person. "Thank you, Lena, but it's not necessary." She nodded, clearly sensing she had touched on a forbidden subject. She quickly finished her cleaning and said goodbye with a professional courtesy that left Gideon with an inexplicable sense of loss. That night, Gideon had another dream about Lena, but this time the dream was dark. She was in a dark church, kneeling before an altar, crying tears of blood, and he was trapped outside shouting her name, trying to break down the wooden doors with his bare hands. Gideon woke up in a cold sweat, with a terrible premonition that time was running out. The following week, Lena didn't show up. Gideon waited all day on Tuesday, cancelling 2 important meetings, but she didn't come. On Thursday he did the same, and again nothing. Finally on Friday Gideon called the cleaning company. "Is Lena Collins all right?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, Mr. Sinclair, I'm glad you called. Lena had a personal issue and had to take some time off, but we sent a replacement, Rosangela. Did you not receive her?" Gideon hadn't received anyone because he had made it clear to the doorman that only Lena was authorized to come up. "What kind of personal issue?" "I'm not sure, sir. Something about her fainting during a class at college. She was taken to the hospital." Gideon felt as if the floor had opened up beneath his feet. "Which hospital?" "I wouldn't know, sir." Gideon hung up the phone and stood in the middle of the room, his mind racing. Lena had fainted. She was in the hospital, and he was sure it was no coincidence. The easy-eye curse was beginning to act. He picked up his cell phone and called his personal assistant. "Marcus, I need you to find out where a woman named Lena Collins is admitted. She works for Citywide Cleaning Services, fainted during a class at her college, probably CUNY." "Yes, sir. Anything specific?" "I want to know her condition, and I want the best doctors available on her case, whatever it is, no matter the cost." "Understood. I'll arrange it." Gideon hung up and walked to the window. Below, the city continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the panic that was consuming him. For the first time in years, Gideon felt completely helpless. 2 hours later, Marcus called back. "Sir, I found her. She's at Bellevue Hospital. Apparently she fainted during an exam and was taken to the ER. The doctors can't find anything physically wrong with her, but she's having strange episodes." "What kind of episodes?" "Nightmares during the day, even while awake. Says she sees things that aren't there. The psychiatrists think it might be stress or exhaustion." Gideon knew it wasn't stress. It was the beginning of the psychic deterioration that accompanied the curse. He had seen it before. With Camilla, arrange a transfer to New York Presbyterian. Private room, the best specialists, and I want full access to her case. "Sir, may I ask, is she someone special?" Gideon hesitated. How could he explain that Lena Collins was perhaps the only chance he had to break a 3-century-old family curse? How could he explain that he was in love with a woman he had known for less than 2 months and who was now at risk of dying because of him? "Just do as I asked, Marcus." By late afternoon, Gideon was at New York Presbyterian, disguised with sunglasses and a baseball cap, watching Lena through the window of the private room he had arranged for her. She was sleeping, but even in sleep her face showed signs of distress. She moved restlessly in the bed, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Gideon didn't enter the room. He knew his presence could make things worse, but he couldn't leave. He stood there for hours, watching, wishing he could do something to alleviate her suffering. That's when a nurse approached him in the hallway. "Excuse me, are you a relative of the patient?" Gideon thought about lying, but something in the nurse's concerned expression made him hesitate. "I'm a close friend." Good. She was asking for a Gideon. Said she needed to speak with Gideon urgently. Gideon's heart stopped. "She's awake." "Yes, she woke up a little while ago, and she seems very distressed. Perhaps your presence will calm her." Gideon knew he should leave. He knew that every minute near Lena put her in greater danger. But she was calling for him, and he couldn't resist. He entered the room with his heart pounding. Lena was sitting up in bed, her face pale but her eyes bright and intense. When she saw him, she smiled with a relief that broke his heart. "Gideon," she said softly, "I knew you would come." It was the first time she had called him by his first name, and something in the way she pronounced it made him feel as if he were coming home after a long journey. "How are you feeling?" he asked, cautiously approaching the bed. "Confused. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with me physically, but I know there is." Gideon pulled a chair over and sat beside the bed, keeping a safe distance. "Tell me what's happening." Lena looked into his eyes, and Gideon saw a lucidity there that surprised him. "I dream about you, Gideon, every night since we met, but they're not normal dreams, they're memories, as if I've known you for a long time, as if we've lived this before." Gideon felt a shiver run down his spine. "What kind of memories?" "An old church, 18th century maybe. You're there, but it's not you. It's like your ancestor, and there's a woman, an enslaved woman who looks like me, and there's so much pain, so much suffering." Gideon went cold. How was it possible that Lena was dreaming about the origin of the family curse? How could she know about his great-great-grandfather and the enslaved woman? "And there's something else," Lena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "In the dreams, I see where you hide that thing, the object in your closet, and I know it's because of it that I'm here, in this hospital." Gideon stood up abruptly from the chair. "Lena, you don't understand." "I understand more than you think." She reached out her hand to him. "Gideon, don't be afraid of me. I know that all the women who got close to you suffered. I know about Marianne, Camilla, Lucia." "How do you know those names?" Gideon asked, genuinely shocked. "Grandma taught me that some souls are chosen for special missions, and I know I was chosen to help you, to help us." Gideon looked at Lena's outstretched hands. Delicate, calloused from work, but firm. There was a strength there, he recognized, a determination that drew him in irresistibly. But there was also danger. Great danger. "If you knew what you were risking by being near me, you wouldn't say that," Gideon said, his voice laden with pain. "But I do know, and I'm here anyway." Gideon studied her for a long moment. There was something different about Lena compared to the other women. It wasn't just the purity he had noticed from the beginning. It was a spiritual strength, a connection to something greater that he couldn't fully comprehend. "Maybe, just maybe. The doctors said you can be discharged tomorrow," Gideon said finally. "When you leave, don't come back to my building. Don't look for me. Forget you ever met me." "I can't do that." "Why not?" Lena smiled, and in that smile, Gideon saw centuries of female wisdom, the same strength his own grandmother had tried to teach him when he was a child. "Because I love you, Gideon Sinclair, and I know you love me too." The words hit Gideon like a lightning bolt, not because they were unexpected, but because they were absolutely true. He loved Lena Collins. He loved her quiet strength, her determination, her purity, her courage to face the unknown. And that was exactly why he needed to protect her from himself. Gideon leaned in and kissed Lena's forehead gently, allowing himself that one moment of tenderness. "Take care of yourself, Lena," he murmured against her skin. "And forgive me." When he pulled away, he saw tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of understanding. "Gideon," she called as he was about to leave the room, "the curse can only be broken with true love. And true love requires courage, from both of us." Gideon stopped at the door without turning around. "And what if I don't have that courage? Then we will both be lost forever." Gideon left the hospital with a broken heart and a terrible certainty. Lena Collins would not give up on him easily, and he wasn't sure he wanted her to. That night, alone in his penthouse, Gideon opened the closet where he kept the prayer box. For the first time in years, he removed the ancestral piece from its safe and held it in his hands. The object was warm, pulsing as if it had a life of its own, and Gideon could have sworn he heard whispers coming from within it, whispers in a language he didn't recognize, but somehow understood, whispers that said, "She has come, the one who can free us has come." Gideon put the prayer box back in the safe and locked everything up again, but he knew it was no use. The process had begun, and there was no stopping it now. Lena Collins was about to change his life forever, or destroy it completely. And Gideon was beginning to suspect they might be the same thing. Gideon didn't sleep that night. He sat on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the dawn paint the New York skyscrapers gold, while Lena's words echoed in his mind like a disturbing mantra. The curse can only be broken with true love. True love. As if it were that simple. As if he hadn't tried to love before and seen his attempts end in tragedy. Marianne, Camilla, Lucia, they had all paid the price for getting too close to Gideon Sinclair's heart. But Lena was different. There was something about her that defied everything he thought he knew about his curse. The way she had dreamed of the past, how she knew names he had never mentioned, how she seemed connected to forces he barely understood. At 7 in the morning, the phone rang. It was Marcus. "Sir, the patient has been discharged from the hospital. She's on her way home." Gideon hesitated. "Where? Does she live?" "I have the address here, a boarding house in Astoria, Queens." Gideon knew the area. It was a lower middle-class neighborhood, full of boarding houses and tenements that housed students and workers who came from out of town seeking opportunities. The thought of Lena returning alone to a place like that, still fragile from the episodes in the hospital, deeply unsettled him. "Marcus, I want you to hire a discreet security detail to watch over her, make sure she's okay." "Sir?" "Not to interfere, just to make sure she's safe." Gideon hung up before his assistant could ask any more questions. He knew he was contradicting himself, that he had promised himself to keep his distance from Lena, but he couldn't simply ignore her well-being. For the rest of the week, Gideon received discreet reports about Lena. She had returned to her classes, gone back to work at the cleaning company and other buildings, and maintained a seemingly normal routine. But the reports also mentioned that she seemed distracted, that her classmates had noticed she was different, more introspective. Gideon wanted to believe she was recovering, that she would return to her normal life and forget him. But a part of him knew that wouldn't happen. Lena had been touched by the same force that haunted him, and there was no going back. The following Thursday, Gideon was in a virtual meeting with Japanese investors when he heard the elevator rise to his penthouse. He frowned as he wasn't expecting anyone. He interrupted the meeting with a flimsy excuse and went to check. Lena was in the living room, wearing the cleaning company uniform, but there was something different about her. Her eyes held a determination he hadn't seen before, a strength that seemed to emanate from far, beyond her years. "How did you get in?" Gideon asked, genuinely confused. He had left clear instructions at the front desk that she should no longer be allowed up. "The new doorman didn't know the instructions," Lena answered simply. "And I need to finish a conversation we started at the hospital." Gideon studied her face. Lena seemed more mature, as if the episodes in the hospital had accelerated some process of self-discovery. "Lena, I told you. I know what you said. And I also know you've had someone watching me for a week." Gideon tensed. "How do you know that?" "Grandma taught me to notice when I'm being watched. She also taught me that men who hire security to protect women they supposedly want to forget are usually lying to themselves." Lena's insight surprised him. She had figured it all out and still came back. "Why did you come?" "Because I had other dreams." Clearer this time. Lena walked around the room, lightly touching the furniture as if feeling its energy. "I saw the origin of everything, Gideon. I saw your great-great-grandfather. I saw Yemanja." Gideon felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. "How do you know her name?" "Because in the dreams I am her. Or she lives through me. I'm not sure how to explain it." Lena stopped in front of the window overlooking the city. "Yemanja was the name of the enslaved woman your ancestor killed. She was a priestess, a woman of great spiritual power, and before she died she didn't just cast a curse, she made a prophecy." Gideon felt his legs weaken. "What prophecy?" Lena turned to him, and for a moment Gideon had the impression of seeing two women superimposed, the 28-year-old cleaning lady from Louisiana and a majestic, black woman from centuries ago. That one day a woman would come with the same pure heart as hers, the same connection to the sacred feminine. And this woman would have the power to break the curse, but only if the last Gideon Sinclair had enough courage to trust in love. "And you believe you're that woman?" "I know I am." The conviction in Lena's voice was absolute, without arrogance, just the serene certainty of someone who knows their destiny. Gideon walked to his bar and poured himself a glass of water, trying to process everything he was hearing. "And what if you're wrong? What if you're just another victim of the curse like the others?" "Then at least I will have tried. But I'm not wrong, Gideon, and you know it." Gideon looked at her for a long moment. There was something irresistible about Lena's presence, a magnetic force that drew him in like nothing had before. But there was also fear, the deep terror of seeing her suffer like the others. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. "For you to show me the prayer box." Gideon felt his blood run cold. "No." "Gideon, no!" His voice came out louder than he intended. "You don't understand the danger. That object it's pure evil. Every woman who got near it was destroyed, because they weren't who they needed to be. I am." Lena started walking towards the hallway leading to the bedrooms, and Gideon felt panic seize him. He ran in front of her, blocking the path. "Lena, please, don't do this." She stopped right in front of him, so close that Gideon could smell the soft scent of her shampoo, see the small freckles that dotted her nose. "Are you afraid of me, or are you afraid for me?" she asked softly. "Both. You don't need to be afraid of me. I would never harm you. And I would never forgive myself if something happened to you." Lena raised her hand and gently touched his face. It was the first intimate physical contact between them, and Gideon felt an electric current surge through his entire body. "Gideon, look at me." He obeyed, getting lost in her deep brown eyes. "I'm not Marianne, who was too young and inexperienced. I'm not Camilla, who sought power and status. I'm not Lucia, who wanted to change you. I'm Lena, and I love you exactly as you are, curse and all." "How can you love something like that?" "Because your curse isn't you, Gideon. It's something that was done to you, to your family. You're the man who hires security to protect a woman he barely knows. You're the man who pays for the best hospital for a cleaning lady. You're the man who isolated himself to avoid hurting anyone. Your curse is your pain, but you are your kindness." Lena's words struck Gideon like well-aimed daggers to his soul. No one had seen kindness in him for a long time, not even himself. "Lena," he murmured, his resistance crumbling like sugar in the rain. "Let me help you, Gideon. Let me at least try." Gideon closed his eyes, fighting against all his self-preservation instincts. When he opened them again, he saw in Lena a strength he recognized from somewhere deep in his ancestral memory. It was the same strength his great-grandmother had described when telling stories about wise women who healed with their hands and their hearts. "If I show you the prayer box," he said slowly, "do you promise that if I ask you to stop, you will stop?" "I promise." Gideon studied her for another moment, then sighed in defeat. "All right, but you need to understand that you're risking your life." "I understand." Gideon walked to the closet with trembling legs. With each step, he felt as if he were walking towards his own judgment. He typed the code into the safe with slightly shaking fingers and removed the rosewood prayer box. The object felt heavier than usual, and Gideon could feel a strange energy emanating from it, as if it knew it would finally be seen by eyes that could understand it. When he turned around, Lena was standing a few feet away, but her expression had changed completely. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with recognition. "It's exactly like in the dreams," she whispered. Can I touch it?" "Lena, I don't think that's a good idea." But she was already approaching. Gideon held the prayer box tighter, as if he could protect her from it. "Please," Lena said, "I need to feel its energy. I need to understand." Against all his instincts, Gideon extended the prayer box towards her. The moment Lena's fingers touched the ancient wood, two things happened simultaneously. Gideon felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and Lena let out a low, deep groan. But instead of pulling away, she held the prayer box with him, her fingers intertwined with his over the ornate surface. "She's here," Lena whispered, her eyes closed in concentration. "Yemanja is here, trapped in this object. She isn't the curse, Gideon. She's the victim." Gideon felt the world spin around him. "What do you mean?" "Your great-great-grandfather didn't just kill her. He trapped her soul in this prayer box through a dark ritual he learned from other slave owners. He wanted to use her spiritual strength to protect the family's fortune, but the ritual went wrong. Gideon was having trouble breathing. The version of the story he knew was being turned on its head. Instead of protecting the family, Yemanja's trapped soul became a destructive force that attacked any woman who threatened to release her true power through love. Lena continued, still with her eyes closed. "Because true love could break the chains that bind her." "And now, what do we do?" Lena opened her eyes and Gideon saw tears rolling down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of compassion. "Now we set her free." "How?" "With the same power that trapped her. True love, without fear, without reservation." Lena looked into his eyes. "Do you trust me, Gideon?" Gideon studied her face. In those eyes was a wisdom that transcended her age, a strength that seemed to come from centuries of women who had loved and fought and survived. "I do," he said, and realized it was the first time in years he had said those words, and truly meant them. Lena smiled, and in that smile Gideon saw the future he had, always wanted, but never believed possible. "Then kiss me," she said simply. Gideon hesitated for only a second before leaning in and pressing his lips against hers. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if they were both testing unknown waters. But then something ignited between them, a passion that seemed to come from far beyond the present moment. The moment they kissed, still holding the prayer box together, Gideon felt as if the entire world had exploded in golden light. He heard a sound like chains breaking, followed by a deep, liberated sigh that seemed to come from the object itself. When they pulled apart, breathless, the prayer box was different. The dark wood had taken on a lighter, warmer hue, and the gold inlays shone with a soft light that came from no external source. "She's free," Lena whispered, smiling through her tears. "Yemanja is finally free." Gideon looked at the transformed prayer box and felt as if a weight he had carried his entire life had been lifted from his shoulders, but more importantly, he looked at Lena and knew with absolute certainty that she would be okay, that they would be okay. "Is it true?" he asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Is the curse really over?" "It's over," Lena confirmed, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him again. "Now it's just Gideon and Lena, two people who love each other and have a whole life ahead of them." Gideon hugged her tightly, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, feeling the warmth of her body against his. For the first time in 4 years, he allowed himself to dream of a future that included another person. "I love you, Lena Collins," he said against her ear. "I love you too, Gideon. Sinclair. And now we're going to find out what it's like to love without fear." As they kissed again, the late afternoon sun streamed through the penthouse windows, bathing everything in a golden light that seemed to bless the beginning of something new and wonderful. But Gideon didn't know that, hundreds of miles away, in a county clerk's office in a small Louisiana town, an employee was discovering old documents that would reveal Yemanjah's story was even more complex than they imagined, and that the true test of their love was yet to come. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Gideon Sinclair's life. For the first time since he was a teenager, he woke up every morning with anticipation instead of resignation. Lena had changed everything in his existence, bringing light to dark corners he had forgotten existed. She hadn't officially returned to work in his penthouse as a cleaner. Instead, Gideon had created a position for her in his company, Special Assistant for Social Projects. It was a role that allowed her to continue her studies and, at the same time, work on something that gave her purpose. Lena had suggested the company invest in education programs for employees' children, and Gideon was impressed by her intelligence and social vision. But it was in their intimacy that Gideon discovered the true extent of his transformation. Lena gave herself to him with a passion that was both innocent and profound, touching parts of his soul he thought were dead forever. Making love to her was like rediscovering the kind of man he truly was beneath years of fear and isolation. It was on one of those golden May mornings, as they lay together in the penthouse bed watching the sun rise over New York, that Gideon's phone rang. Insistently. "Let it ring," Lena murmured against his chest, tracing lazy circles with her fingers on his skin. Gideon was inclined to agree, but something in the phone's persistent tone made him hesitate. It was his personal cell, a number very few people had. "I'd better get it," he said, kissing her forehead before getting up. "Gideon Sinclair," he answered. "Mr. Sinclair, this is Dr. Henry Moreira from New York Presbyterian. You asked me to be informed of any change in patient Camilla Ferreira's condition." Gideon felt his blood run cold. Camilla, his ex-girlfriend who had been in the psychiatric clinic in the Berkshires for 5 years. "What happened?" he asked, moving away from the bed so as not to alarm Lena. "She woke up, sir, after 5 years in a catatonic state. She woke up during the night and is asking to speak with you, and, well, there's something strange." "Strange how?" "She claims to remember everything that happened over the last 5 years, even while she was unconscious, and she says she has important information about your family that you need to know." Gideon looked at Lena, who had sat up in bed and was watching him with concern. "Doctor, is that possible? For someone in a catatonic state to be aware of what's happening around them? It's extremely rare, but there are documented cases. The most disturbing thing is that she mentioned recent events that actually happened. She knew about your new partner. She knew her name." Gideon felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. "How can she know about Lena?" "We don't know. But Mr. Sinclair, she's very agitated. She says your partner is in danger, that there are things about your family's curse that you don't know. The doctors think it would be best if you came in person." Gideon hung up the phone with trembling hands. How was this possible? The curse was over. They had freed Yemanjah. Everything was resolved. "Gideon?" Lena had gotten up and approached him. "What is it?" He looked at her, trying to decide how much he should tell her. Lena had been through so much in the past few weeks, and the last thing he wanted was to worry her unnecessarily. It was the hospital. Camilla, an ex-girlfriend who's been institutionalized for years, she woke up. Lena studied his expression. "And that made you turn white. As a ghost, why?" Gideon sighed. He couldn't lie to Lena, not after everything they had been through together. "Because, according to the doctors, she knows things she shouldn't know about us." Lena remained silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, to Gideon's surprise, she nodded as if it made perfect sense. "We have to go to her," she said simply. "Lena, no. If there's something we don't know about the curse, if there's any danger... Gideon. Lena placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look her in the eyes. We face this together, remember? No secrets, no fear. Gideon looked at her for a long moment, seeing in those brown eyes the same determination that had won him over from the very first day. All right, he said finally, but at any sign that something is wrong, we leave. An hour later, they were on the road to the Berkshires. Gideon drove his Porsche through the winding mountain roads, trying to keep his mind focused on the traffic, but his thoughts kept returning to Camilla. She had been so different from Lena. Ambitious, sophisticated, accustomed to luxury. When they started dating, Gideon had thought he had finally found someone who could understand his world. But then came the nightmares, the hallucinations, the progressive mental deterioration that culminated in her being found in a fetal position in their apartment's bathroom, murmuring words in languages she didn't know. Gideon, Lena's voice interrupted his dark thoughts. Tell me about her, about Camilla. Gideon hesitated. Why do you want to know? Because I can feel your tension, and because I need to understand what happened to help solve what's happening now. Gideon took a deep breath and began to tell her. He talked about how he met Camilla at a charity gala, about their seemingly perfect relationship, about how things slowly started to go wrong. Lena listened in silence, occasionally asking pointed questions that showed she was truly paying attention. And did you love her? Lena asked when Gideon finished his story. I thought I did, but now I know it wasn't real love. It was convenient, safe, or at least it seemed to be. And did she love you? Gideon thought about the question. She loved what I represented. The status, the wealth, the power. I don't know if she ever really knew who I was. Lena nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. She reached out and intertwined her fingers with his on the gear shift. Then I have nothing to worry about, she said with a small smile. Gideon brought her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers. You never will. The psychiatric clinic in the Berkshires was an elegant, discreet building, built in the style of a Swiss chalet that blended in with the town's architecture. Gideon had only visited Camilla there twice in the 5 years since she was admitted. The visits were too painful, seeing the vibrant, intelligent woman he had known reduced to a vegetative state. Dr. Moreira met them at the entrance, a man in his 50s with a graying beard and kind eyes. Mr. Sinclair, thank you for coming, and you must be Lena, he said, extending his hand to her. How did you know my name? Lena asked, shaking his hand. Camilla mentioned you several times. She's very anxious to meet you. Gideon and Lena exchanged a look. How could Camilla know Lena if they had never met? Doctor, how is it possible that she knows about our lives if she's been in a coma for 5 years? Gideon asked. That's one of the most intriguing aspects of the case. Camilla claims that while her body was unconscious, her mind was elsewhere. She says she's been on the other side all this time. The other side, Lena repeated. Her words. She says she was in a place between worlds where she could observe everything happening here without being able to interfere, and that she was only able to come back when you broke what she calls the first seal. Gideon felt a shiver run down his spine. First seal? You'll have to ask her. She's waiting in the inner garden, she insisted. The conversation had to be outdoors in the sunlight. They followed the doctor through bright, well-lit corridors until they reached a beautifully manicured inner garden. Camilla was sitting on a bench under a tree, her back to them. Even from a distance, Gideon could see she was different, thinner with graying hair at her temples, but there was something in her posture that radiated an energy that wasn't there before. Camilla? Gideon called softly. She turned, and Gideon almost didn't recognize her. The eyes that were once cold and calculating now shone with a deep wisdom and compassion. Camilla smiled, and it was as if she were a completely new person. Gideon and Lena. She stood up and walked towards them. Finally, I can speak with you. To Gideon's surprise, Camilla hugged Lena as if they were old friends. Thank you, she whispered in her ear, for freeing Yemanja, for giving me a chance to come back. Lena returned the hug and Gideon saw tears in her eyes. "How do you know about Yemanja?" Lena asked when they separated. "Because I was with her all these years," Camilla replied, sitting back down on the bench and gesturing for them to join her. "When the curse hit me, my soul was pulled to the same place where her soul was trapped. I spent 5 years learning from her, understanding the true story." Gideon sat next to Lena, holding her hand tightly. "What true story?" Camilla took a deep breath, as if preparing to reveal something very important. "Gideon, freeing Yemanja was just the beginning. Your great-great-grandfather didn't perform just one ritual. He performed 3. 3 rituals of imprisonment, with 3 different women. Yemanja was only the first." Gideon felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean 3? There was a Yoruba woman, a Native American woman, and a young Irish woman who tried to defend the others. He killed all 3 and trapped their souls in 3 different objects. The prayer box was only one of them." Lena squeezed Gideon's hand. "Where are the others?" "That's the issue. Yemanja doesn't know. The objects were separated decades ago, but she knows that until all 3 souls are freed, the curse will never truly end. You broke the first seal, but there are 2 more." Gideon was trying to process the information. "But I feel different, free, as if the curse really is over. Because breaking the first seal lifted much of the weight. But Gideon," Camilla looked directly into his eyes, "if you don't find and free the other 2 souls, the curse will return, and it will be worse the second time." "Worse how?" Lena asked, her voice firm despite the gravity of the situation. "Because now there's true love involved. The curse will try to destroy not just Lena, but the very love between you. It will make you hate each other, hurt each other, until there's nothing left." Gideon felt as if the world was collapsing around him again. They had thought they had won, that they were free, but it was just an illusion. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Yemanja said you have until the next full moon. After that, if the other seals aren't broken, the curse will return with full force." Gideon looked at Lena, expecting to see fear or regret in her eyes, but he found only determination. "Then that's what we'll do," she said simply. "We'll find the other objects and free the other souls." "Lena, you don't understand. It could be too dangerous. It could be—" "Gideon Sinclair," she interrupted, turning to face him completely. "When did I ever give you the impression that I'm a woman who gives up easily?" Despite all the tension, Gideon couldn't suppress a smile. Lena Collins truly was extraordinary. "Camilla, do you have any clues where to look?" Lena asked. "Yemanja told me you should start at the source, the place where it all began." Camilla hesitated. "You'll need to go to the original Sinclair family estate, the one in rural Virginia." Gideon tensed. "That estate has been abandoned for decades, ever since my grandfather died. But it still belongs to the family, and that's where the answers are." Gideon looked at Lena, who nodded encouragingly. "All right," he said. "We'll go to the estate." Camilla smiled. "There's one more thing. You're not going alone. I'm coming with you." "Camilla, you just came out of a 5-year coma. Gideon, I spent 5 years learning from Yemanja. I know things that could be crucial to freeing the other souls. Besides," she looked at Lena, "Lena is going to need someone who understands what she's about to face, someone who's already been through it." Lena studied Camilla for a moment, then nodded. "She's right. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." Gideon looked at the 2 women, one he had loved in the past and one he loved in the present, and had the strange feeling that his destiny was being woven by forces far greater than his own will. "When do we leave?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," Camilla replied. "There's no time to waste." That night, in the hotel where they stayed in the Berkshires, Gideon made love to Lena with a desperate intensity, as if it were the last time, because in a way, perhaps, it was. If they couldn't break the other 2 seals, they might lose not only their lives but their ability to love each other. "Don't be afraid," Lena whispered against his lips as they moved together in the darkness of the room. "Our love is stronger than any curse." Gideon wanted to believe her. He needed to believe, because the alternative was too unbearable to consider. The Santa Helena estate was a 2-hour drive from D.C., lost among hills covered in pine trees and abandoned pastures. Gideon hadn't visited the place in over 15 years, since his grandfather's funeral. As he drove down the dirt road leading to the main house, he felt the weight of his family's history pressing on his shoulders like a tombstone. Lena sat beside him, watching the landscape through the window with a thoughtful expression. Camilla was in the back seat, strangely silent since they had left the Berkshires. During the drive, she had shared more details about her time on the other side, but something in her expression suggested she was holding back important information. The main house appeared at the end of an avenue of royal palms that had grown wild in the absence of care. It was an imposing 19th-century structure, with thick, rammed earth walls and a red-tiled roof that time had covered in moss. The wooden windows were boarded up, and the veranda that wrapped around the entire house was partially collapsed. Gideon stopped the car in front of the main entrance steps and turned off the engine. The ensuing silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the sound of the wind in the trees and the distant call of a few birds. "This is it," he said unnecessarily. Lena got out of the car and stood for a moment, obviously sensing something the others couldn't perceive. Her eyes closed in concentration. "There's so much pain in this place," she said softly. "Centuries of pain." Camilla got out of the car as well, but stayed close to the vehicle. "Yamanja told me it would be like this. This place was built on suffering." Gideon pulled an old key from his pocket. He had collected all the estate's keys from his lawyer's office that Thursday morning. The lock on the main door was rusted but still worked. The hinges protested with a sharp creak as the door opened, revealing an entrance hall, covered in dust and cobwebs. The light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows created golden rays filled with dancing dust particles. The furniture was covered with white sheets that time had yellowed, giving the house a ghostly appearance. "Where do we start?" Gideon asked. Lena walked slowly through the room, touching the walls as she had done in his penthouse. "Is there a special place here? A room that was used for rituals?" Gideon thought for a moment. "There was a private chapel at the back of the house. My grandfather said it was built by the first, Gideon Sinclair, for his spiritual practices." "That's where we need to go," Camilla said with conviction. They walked through the house, passing rooms that held echoes of a bygone grandeur. Portraits of ancestors watched them from the walls, their eyes seeming to follow them as they moved through the dark corridors. Gideon recognized some faces from the stories his grandfather used to tell. Wealthy planters, influential politicians, men who had built fortunes on the labor of people who could not choose their lives. The chapel was at the end of a long hallway. The door was different from the others. In the house, made of dark, almost black wood with intricate carvings that seemed to depict biblical scenes, but there was something disturbing about the images, something that didn't belong in a Christian chapel. Gideon opened the door and immediately felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air was colder, denser, charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. The chapel was small, with wooden pews arranged before a stone altar. But what caught everyone's attention was the wall behind the altar. It was covered in strange symbols, a mix of Christian iconography with elements that clearly came from other spiritual traditions. "My God," Camilla whispered. "It's exactly as Yamanja described." Lena approached the altar slowly, her hand outstretched as if feeling something invisible in the air. "They're here," she said, her voice low and tense. "The other objects are here." Gideon looked around, but he saw nothing but the empty altar and dusty pews. "Where?" Lena pointed to the floor behind the altar. "Underneath. There's a hidden space under the altar." Gideon and Camilla joined her. Examining it more closely, Gideon could see that some of the floor stones were slightly different from the others, as if they had been removed and replaced. "There must be a lever or mechanism," Gideon said, running his hands along the edges of the altar. It was Camilla who found it. By pressing one of the carved stones on the altar, they heard a low click, followed by the sound of stones moving. A section of the floor opened up, revealing a stone staircase that descended into darkness. Gideon used his phone's flashlight to illuminate the path. The steps were steep and slippery with moisture. The air rising from the underground had a sweet, cloying smell, like rotting flowers. "Are you sure we want to go down there?" Gideon asked, looking at the two women. "We have no choice," Lena answered, but Gideon noticed an almost imperceptible tremor in her voice. They descended in single file, with Gideon in front holding the flashlight. What they found in the basement left them speechless. It was a circular chamber carved out of the rock, with walls covered in more strange symbols. But what dominated the space were two stone pedestals in the center of the room, each supporting an object. On the first pedestal was an ornate silver necklace, with feathers and small bones, clearly of Native American origin. On the second, a gold crucifix studded with precious stones, but it had been modified in some dark way. It had symbols engraved on it that did not belong to the Christian tradition. "The necklace belonged to the Cherokee woman," Camilla said, her voice echoing in the chamber, "and the crucifix to the young Irish woman." Lena approached the objects but stopped before touching them. "I can feel their souls. They've been trapped here for so long." "How do we free them?" Gideon asked. "The same way we freed Yemenjar, with true love." "But Camilla hesitated. "Yemenjar warned me it would be harder this time, because the other two souls are more bitter, more furious. They might try to take revenge on you." "Revenge? How?" "By making you feel all the pain they felt, all the fear, all the anger, all the despair." Gideon looked at Lena, seeing his own concern reflected in her eyes. "We have to try," Lena said. "We can't leave them trapped forever." Gideon nodded. "What do we need to do?" "You'll have to touch the objects at the same time," Camilla explained. "And when you do, you'll be transported to the past. You'll experience what happened to those women, and you'll only be able to free them if you can keep your love for each other intact through all the pain." Gideon and Lena looked at each other. There was no hesitation in her eyes, only determination. "I'm ready," Lena said. Gideon took a deep breath. "Me too." They positioned themselves, one in front of each pedestal. Gideon reached his hand towards the crucifix, while Lena did the same with the necklace. "If something goes wrong," Gideon began. "It won't," Lena interrupted. "I trust you. And I trust our love." Together they touched the objects. The world exploded in pain. Gideon found himself in his great-great-grandfather's body, feeling all the cruelty and thirst for power that consumed the man. At the same time, he felt the agony of each woman who had been tortured and killed. The Native American woman Ayasha, torn from her tribe and forced to witness the massacre of her family. The Irish woman, Teresa, a young nun who had tried to protect the enslaved and paid with her own life. The pain was unbearable. Gideon felt as if his heart was being ripped from his chest over and over. He felt the hatred of the trapped souls, their thirst for revenge, their desire to make him suffer as they had suffered. And through it all, he could feel Lena beside him, going through the same torture. He could hear her screams of pain, could feel her agony. And for the first time since they began this journey, Gideon thought about giving up. The pain was too much. Seeing Lena suffer was worse than any curse. But then, through the agony, he heard her voice. "Gideon, remember our first kiss? Remember how you made me feel loved?" Gideon focused on the memory. The moment he had first kissed Lena in the penthouse, the feeling of completeness he had felt, the certainty that he had finally found his other half. The pain continued, but now there was something stronger. Love. Love for Lena, love for the suffering souls, compassion even for his great-great-grandfather and his destructive lust for power. "I feel your pain," Gideon shouted to the trapped souls. "I feel what was done to you, and I ask for forgiveness. On behalf of my family, I ask for forgiveness. You don't deserve to be trapped," Lena shouted too. "You deserve peace, you deserve rest." The pain began to subside, replaced by a feeling of warmth and light. Gideon could feel the souls of Ayasha and Teresa calming, their fury giving way to understanding. And then, suddenly, they were back in the underground chamber. But the objects had changed. The necklace now shone with a soft golden light, and the crucifix radiated a serene peace. "It's done," Camilla said, tears streaming down her face. "They're free." Gideon and Lena collapsed to the floor, exhausted by the experience. He pulled her into his arms, needing to feel that she was okay, that they were still together. "Is it over?" Lena asked against his chest. "It's over," Gideon confirmed. kissing her hair. The curse is really over now. But as they started to climb the stairs to leave the chamber, Gideon heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the sound of stones moving. Looking back, he saw that the entrance to the chamber was closing on its own. "Run!" he shouted, pushing Lena and Camilla up the stairs. They ran through the chapel, through the corridors of the house until they reached the front veranda. Only then did they stop to look back. The house was different. It looked cleaner, more alive, as if a weight had been lifted from it. And in the air, Gideon could have sworn he heard voices whispering, "Thank you," in the wind. "It's really over," Camilla said, smiling for the first time since he had met this version of her. "I can feel it. The darkness is gone." Gideon looked at Lena, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. "Now, we're truly free," she said. "Free to love without fear, without shadows from the past." Gideon kissed her right there on the veranda of the house where his family had caused so much suffering, but where peace now reigned. It was a kiss of celebration, of relief, of pure and true love. When they separated, Camilla was standing by the car, clearly preparing to leave. "Where are you going?" Lena asked. "I'm going to live my life. For real this time." Camilla smiled. "Thank you for giving me this chance. For freeing all of us." Gideon nodded. "Thank you for helping us." Camilla got into the car she had called and waved one last time before disappearing down the dirt road. Gideon and Lena were left alone on the veranda, watching the sun set over the hills. For the first time since they met, there were no shadows between them, no curses, no secrets, no fear. There was only love. "And now?" Lena asked, leaning against him. "Now we go back to New York and build the life we always wanted to have," Gideon answered, without looking back. "And the estate?" Gideon looked at the ancestral home, now peaceful and beautiful in the golden light of dusk. "We'll turn it into something good, an educational center for underprivileged children, a place of healing instead of a place of pain." Lena smiled. "Ayasha and Teresa would like that. And Yemanja, too." They walked hand in hand to the car, ready to start their real life together. A life without curses, without fear, without regrets. A life built on the true love that had proven stronger than 3 centuries of darkness. 1 year later, Gideon woke up in the penthouse bedroom to the soft sound of rain against the windows and Lena's arms wrapped around his waist. It was a Saturday morning in December and New York was being washed by one of the typical summer thunderstorms that cooled the city and filled the air with the sweet smell of wet earth. Over the past 12 months, Gideon's life had changed in ways he never imagined possible, not just because the curse was gone, but because Lena had brought color to corners of his existence he didn't even know were gray. The transformation of the Santa Helena estate into an educational center had been just the beginning. Together, they had created a program that offered quality education to children from underprivileged communities, scholarships for talented youth, and vocational courses for adults. Lena had graduated with honors in education and now directed the educational project, while Gideon handled the administrative and financial side. But the real change was in the small details of daily life. Gideon woke up every morning with anticipation instead of resignation. He laughed more than he had in his entire adult life. He discovered he enjoyed cooking with Lena on Sundays, loved hearing her stories about the students, and felt complete in a way he had never experienced before. Lena stirred in his arms, slowly waking. Her hair was spread across the pillow, and she had that sleepy smile that always made Gideon's heart race. "Good morning, my love," she murmured, kissing his bare chest. "Good morning, beautiful," Gideon replied, kissing the top of her head. "Sleep well?" "I always sleep well when I'm in your arms." Gideon smiled. After a year together, comments like that still made him feel like a teenager in love. Lena had that effect on him. She made him feel new, as if life were just beginning. "What time does Carmina get here?" Lena asked, referring to the new cleaner they had hired after Lena officially left the cleaning company. "At 10. We have time." Lena lifted her head and looked at him with that mischievous glint in her eyes that Gideon had learned to recognize. "Time for what?" she asked, feigning innocence. In response, Gideon turned her over in bed and positioned himself above her, propped on his elbows so as not to hurt her. Lena laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed through the room. "For this," he said, kissing her neck at the spot he knew made her sigh. Making love with Lena continued to be a revelation for Gideon. No matter how many times they were together, there was always something new to discover, a new way to connect. She gave herself to him with a passion that was both innocent and ardent, and Gideon knew he would never tire of seeing her face at the moment of ecstasy. Afterward, they lay together, bodies intertwined, listening to the rain outside. Gideon traced lazy circles on Lena's bare back, feeling completely at peace. "Gideon," Lena said, her voice a little hesitant, "can I tell you something?" "Always." "I dreamed of Yemenjar last night." Gideon tensed slightly. In recent months, Lena had occasionally mentioned that she still felt connections to the spiritual world, but the dreams of the freed souls had long since stopped. What did she say? That she has a gift for us, something that will definitively seal our union and ensure that our family's love will always be stronger than any darkness. Gideon pulled back a little to look into her eyes. "What kind of gift?" Lena placed Gideon's hand on her still flat stomach. "A new life." She said, "I'm pregnant." Gideon remained completely still for a moment, processing the words. Pregnant. Lena was pregnant. They were going to have a child. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice coming out huskier than he intended. "I took the test yesterday 3 times, all positive." Lena smiled, but there was a small worry in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" Gideon couldn't answer immediately. A wave of emotions hit him. Joy, fear, love, hope, all mixed into an intensity that left him speechless. He was going to be a father. Lena was going to be a mother. They were going to create a new life together, a life that would be born free of curses, surrounded only by love. "Gideon," Lena called softly. He looked into her eyes and saw there all the happiness he had always sought. He sat up in bed and pulled Lena into his lap, hugging her tightly. "I love you so much," he whispered against her hair, "and I will love our child more than anything in the world." Lena pulled away to look at him, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "So you're happy?" "Happy is an understatement. I'm complete. Finally complete." Gideon kissed Lena with a tenderness that contained all his love, all his gratitude, all his joy. When they separated, he placed his hands on her belly. "Hi, little one," he said softly. "I'm your daddy, and I'll always protect you." Lena laughed through her tears. "How do you know it's a boy?" "I don't know, but I have a feeling." "And if it's a girl?" "Then I'll have to learn how to be a father to a princess." They stayed like that for a long time, imagining what their life would be like with a baby, making plans, dreaming of the future. It was strange how something Gideon had avoided thinking about for so long, having a family, now seemed the most natural thing in the world. 3 months later, they were at the Santa Helena estate for the official inauguration of the educational center. The place had been completely transformed. The main house had been restored and converted into classrooms and offices. Where the dark chapel had once been, there was now a library full of light and color. The old stables had become art and music workshops. More than 200 people attended the inauguration, children from local communities, parents, teachers, local authorities, and even some journalists who wanted to cover the story of the billionaire heir who had transformed a historic property into a social project. Gideon was on the improvised stage they had set up in the front garden, addressing the crowd, when he saw Lena at the back of the audience. She was 4 months pregnant now, her belly just beginning to show under the blue dress she wore. Her hands rested protectively on her stomach, and there was a radiant smile on her face as she watched him. "This place," Gideon said, his voice carrying over the speakers, "was born from love. Love between 2 people who refused to give up on each other. Love for children who deserve a chance to dream. Love for the idea that it's possible to transform pain into healing, darkness into light." He looked directly at Lena when he said, "True love has the power to break any curse, to heal any wound, to transform any destiny. And it is with this love that we dedicate this space to all the children who will pass through here." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Several people were visibly moved, including some of the mothers of the children who would benefit from the program. After the formalities, Gideon found Lena walking through the new gardens that had been planted where the underground chapel used to be. There was no trace of the dark place they had found a year ago. In its place were colorful flower beds and a small water fountain where children could play. "Are you proud?" Gideon asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and placing his hands on her belly. "Very. Yamanja, Ayasha, and Teresa would be happy to see this." "Are you sure?" "I am. I can feel them sometimes. They are at peace, Gideon. Finally at peace." Gideon kissed Lena's neck, breathing in her scent, which was now mixed with the sweet smell of pregnancy. "And so are we," he said. 6 months later, Lena was in the hospital, holding a baby with dark hair and large eyes that seemed to see directly into the soul of whoever looked at him. Gideon sat in the chair next to the bed, still in a bit of a shock that he was really a father. "What are we going to name him?" Lena asked, looking at the baby with a tenderness that made Gideon's heart melt. They had discussed names for months, but had never reached a final decision. Now, seeing his son's perfect face, Gideon knew exactly what his name should be. "Benedict," he said, "like your great-grandmother, so he'll carry her blessing." Lena smiled. "Benedict Sinclair Collins. I like it." "Collins? I want him to have both last names, yours, which represents strength and overcoming, mine, which represents determination and love." Gideon nodded, too emotional to speak. Lena had given him so much: love, hope, purpose, and now a son. He knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of so many blessings. "Can I hold him?" he asked. Lena carefully transferred the baby into Gideon's arms. Benedict opened his eyes and looked directly at his father, as if studying his face. "Hi, my son," Gideon whispered. "Welcome to the world. I'm your daddy, and I'll love you forever." The baby seemed to smile, though Gideon knew it was probably just gas. But at that moment, holding his son in his arms, with Lena beside him watching with love, Gideon felt as if all the pieces of his life had finally fallen into the right place. 2 years later, they were back at the Santa Helena estate to celebrate Benedict's birthday. The boy ran through the garden on his chubby little legs, laughing as Gideon pretended to try to catch him. Lena sat on the veranda, watching the game with a serene smile. The educational center had grown beyond their most optimistic expectations. It now served over 500 children. There was a waiting list for spots, and politicians from other states were interested in replicating the model. But for Gideon, the real success was in the small moments: Benedict saying "Dada" for the first time, lazy Sunday mornings with Lena, the nights when the three of them would lie in bed reading stories. "Gideon," Lena called from the veranda. "Come here. There's something I need to tell you." Gideon scooped Benedict up and walked over to where she was. The boy immediately reached for his mother, who received him with kisses and cuddles. "What is it?" Gideon asked, sitting down beside her. Lena smiled with that special glint in her eyes that Gideon had learned to recognize. "Benedict is going to be a big brother." Gideon felt as if time had stopped. "You're 2 months pregnant." Gideon kissed her with such force that Benedict protested, squeezed between his parents. They laughed, pulling apart, and Gideon hugged his family, with a happiness that seemed to overflow. "This time I'm sure it's a girl," Lena said. "How can you be sure?" "Because I dreamed of her last night. I dreamed we were a family of 4, and our daughter had your eyes and my smile." Gideon looked at Benedict, who was playing with the buttons on Lena's shirt, oblivious to his parents' conversation. Then he looked at Lena, pregnant again, radiant with happiness. "What are we going to name her?" he asked. "Hope," Lena said without hesitation, "so that she'll always remember that no matter how dark the night seems, there is always hope for a new dawn." Gideon nodded, moved. Hope Sinclair Collins. It would be a perfect name for the daughter of the woman who had brought hope back into his life. That night, after Benedict was asleep in his crib, Gideon and Lena stood on the estate's veranda watching the stars. Gideon's arm was wrapped around her, and Lena was leaning against his chest. "Are you happy?" she asked, as she always did. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Gideon answered, as he always did. "And you?" "Complete. I feel complete." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the night sounds of the countryside. Crickets chirping, wind in the trees, the distant sound of some wild animal. "Gideon," Lena said eventually, "thank you." "For what?" "For believing in our love. For having the courage to fight for us. For giving me a life I didn't even know I could dream of." Gideon kissed the top of her head. "I should be thanking you. You saved my life, Lena, in every possible way." "We saved each other." "That's true." Gideon looked up at the starry sky and thought about how his life had changed since that first Thursday when Lena appeared in his office. Just 3 years ago, he was a bitter and lonely man, convinced he was doomed to a life without love. Now he was a husband, a father, and soon to be a father again. He had a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning with gratitude. "I love you, Lena Sinclair Collins," he said, using the name she had adopted after their wedding. "I love you too, Gideon Sinclair. Forever." When they went inside that night, Gideon passed by Benedict's room to check on the boy. The baby was sleeping soundly, one fist clenched near his face, breathing with the serenity only children can manage. Gideon gently touched his son's hair and whispered, "You're going to grow up surrounded by love, my little one. You and your little sister. You'll never know loneliness, you'll never know fear, only love, always love." And in that promise, made in the soft darkness of a child's room, was the complete victory over 3 centuries of a family curse. Love had triumphed, as it always does. Gideon knew Lena was right. They had saved each other, and now together they would raise a new generation that would grow up free of shadows, surrounded only by the golden light of true love. Some curses are broken with magic. Others, the most powerful ones, can only be overcome by the transformative power of unconditional love. And the love of Gideon and Lena had proven stronger than any darkness of the past, more enduring than any ancient magic. They had built a future on the foundation of true love, and that future would shine forever.